Michael Hayes had been planning this trip for nearly a year. The idea of escaping the suffocating routine of work, deadlines, and obligations had become an obsession, a lifeline in a life that felt increasingly like a treadmill. His cabin in the mountains, the crisp air, the endless forests, the quiet stillness, it was his sanctuary. He imagined himself walking along the trails, breathing in the fresh pine-scented air, feeling completely untethered for the first time in decades. But that morning, all that anticipation was shattered in a way he never expected, not by work, not by illness, not by fate, but by his own daughter, Emily. She had always been protective, almost overbearing, but this felt different. As he emerged from his bedroom, still in pajamas, yawning and stretching, Emily stood by the doorway with her arms crossed, a stern, almost hostile expression etched across her face. The sunlight caught in her hair, glinting like fire, but it did nothing to soften the severity in her eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice tight, sharp, commanding. "I don't want you going on this trip. You're staying home." Michael froze mid-step. His mouth opened, then closed, searching for words that could convey both shock and disbelief. What are you talking about?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "I've been planning this trip for months. I've booked everything. Why would you even say that?" Emily didn't flinch. She held his gaze, unwavering. I don't think it's a good idea. You shouldn't go." He felt a strange mix of emotions, hurt, anger, confusion, and an odd sense of betrayal. He had always thought he and Emily had a close relationship, one built on trust, respect, and shared moments. But now, it felt like she was trying to dictate his life, to control something that wasn't hers to control. "Emily," he said carefully, trying to mask the rising frustration in his voice, "I respect your concern, I really do. But this trip isn't about me putting myself in danger. It's about me living a little, enjoying a break I've earned. I need this." Emily's expression hardened. "I said no. End of discussion. You're staying home. I don't care how long you've been planning it." Michael felt a cold wave of anger wash over him. This wasn't just a disagreement, this was a denial of his autonomy, a rejection of his independence. He wanted to argue, to fight, to make her understand, but beneath that impulse, a seed of something darker began to grow, a quiet, simmering desire for payback. Not violent, not cruel, but a need to assert himself, to reclaim what had been taken from him. For the rest of the day, Michael moved through his routine in a daze. Every time he looked at his suitcase packed neatly in the corner, the anger flared again. The betrayal didn't come from an enemy or stranger, it came from his own child, someone he had loved unconditionally. That realization made it cut deeper than he had imagined. He tried talking to Emily again, softening his approach, attempting to reason with her. "Look, I'm not ignoring your feelings. I'm not reckless. But this trip, it's important to me. Can we compromise?" Emily shook her head, her jaw tight. "No compromises. I can't explain it any other way. Just stay home." That night, as Michael lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind refused to calm. He replayed every argument, every exchange, every word. The feeling of betrayal twisted in his chest like a living thing. It wasn't just about the trip anymore, it was about respect, about boundaries, about being treated like an adult. In the shadows of his room, a plan began to take shape. It wasn't fully formed yet, just a whisper of an idea, a way to respond to Emily, not with anger or confrontation, but with something she would never forget. Something that would teach her, quietly, that her attempts to control him had consequences. But even as the plan formed, doubt gnawed at him. Was he being petty? Was this really revenge, or simply self-assertion? Could he reclaim his life without hurting the person he loved most? The questions kept him awake, tangled with images of Emily's face, so serious, so certain, so immovable. Michael realized that whatever he decided, this trip would no longer just be about a vacation. It would be the first step in a confrontation, not with violence or words, but with principle and willpower. And in that quiet, lonely room, he felt the first true spark of anticipation, not just for the mountains, but for the moment when Emily would see him, calm and composed, walking away on his own terms. The thought made his chest tighten, not with anger, but with a strange, thrilling sense of power. He didn't know exactly what would happen, or how Emily would react. But he knew one thing, she would remember this day. And the memory would linger, just as his determination now did. As the clock ticked toward morning, Michael finally slept, but not peacefully. His dreams were filled with sharp images of confrontation, choice, and the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming something that had been denied to him. The mountain trip was no longer just a trip, it was a statement, a subtle act of revenge that would unfold with precision and impact. The days following the confrontation felt like an endless loop of frustration and introspection for Michael. Every morning, he woke to the same icy tension in the house, Emily's glare following him like a shadow. She didn't speak much, but her presence was a constant reminder of the denial he had endured. Her insistence that he cancel his trip gnawed at him in ways he hadn't anticipated, and it wasn't just the trip. Her attitude felt like a rejection of his autonomy, a refusal to acknowledge that he had a right to live his own life. Michael had always believed in reasoned discussions, in negotiation, in finding middle ground. But Emily's stance was immovable. Her reasoning? Minimal and vague. "It's not a good idea," she would say, her voice a mixture of irritation and concern, leaving him grasping for logic. But logic wasn't enough. He began to sense that this was about control, not concern. The realization made a quiet, insistent anger rise in him, one he could neither fully suppress nor fully express. Late at night, after the household had gone silent, Michael found himself pacing the length of his living room, the dim glow of the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. He ran scenarios in his mind: confront her directly and force the issue, argue until she relented, or retreat and suffer in silence. None of these felt right. Each option left a bitter taste of defeat or resentment. Then, slowly, the thought of revenge emerged, not malicious, not cruel, but a subtle, deliberate act that would assert his independence without hurting anyone physically. It was psychological, almost invisible, yet potent. He wanted to communicate to Emily that attempting to control him would not only fail but would have consequences that would be unforgettable. Michael spent hours considering different approaches. A direct argument would escalate into conflict, possibly leaving permanent scars on their relationship. Ignoring her entirely could be interpreted as passive aggression, which might frustrate her further. But a measured, intentional response, executed with calm dignity, had the potential to make the point far more powerfully. In his mind, he began crafting the scenario with painstaking detail. He imagined leaving the house for the trip, not as a man fleeing conflict, but as a man reclaiming his life. He pictured Emily's face as she realized she could not dictate his choices, her shock slowly giving way to grudging respect, or at least stunned recognition. He even rehearsed his words in front of the mirror: calm, measured, resolute. No anger, no yelling, just quiet authority. At the same time, Michael wrestled with a storm of emotions. Was this petty? Was it revenge in the truest sense, or merely a necessary act of self-preservation? The more he considered it, the more he realized the lines between justice, retribution, and personal freedom were blurred. He wanted to assert himself, yet he feared that doing so might irreparably damage his relationship with Emily. And yet, staying silent felt like surrender. Michael's reflection turned inward. He recalled moments from Emily's childhood, when she had been independent, strong-willed, and surprisingly wise. There had been a time when he had admired her assertiveness, but now it felt suffocating. The same qualities that once made him proud now made him feel small, constrained, powerless in his own home. That tension fueled his resolve. Each night, he wrote notes to himself, thoughts, plans, reminders. He wrote down his feelings of betrayal, his desire for autonomy, and his ideas for a subtle, non-hurtful statement of independence. He even mapped out the timing, when he would pack, when he would leave, and how he would respond if Emily confronted him at the last minute. The plan was growing in detail, precision, and psychological weight. Yet Michael's conscience never let him fully escape doubt. There were moments when guilt crept in like an unwelcome guest. Would this really teach Emily a lesson, or would it merely deepen the rift between them? Was asserting himself worth the cost of tension, even temporarily? Could he find a balance between revenge and reconciliation? Emily, in the meantime, continued her silent campaign. She would make offhand comments about responsibility, caution, and safety, each one laced with subtle control. Michael noticed the small, calculated ways she tried to manipulate the household atmosphere. Even mundane conversations became tactical maneuvers, designed to sway him. He realized she was as strategic in her influence as he was in his counterplan. The psychological game between them intensified. Michael found himself observing her, studying her patterns, anticipating her reactions. He realized he had underestimated her stubbornness, her determination to impose her will. And yet, the more he studied her, the more he understood that his response had to be elegant, calculated, and measured. Impulse would betray him. Temper would ruin everything. One afternoon, as Emily approached with another verbal barrier, Michael decided to engage directly, but cautiously. "Emily," he began, choosing his words like chess pieces, "I understand that you're worried, and I value your concern, I really do. But this trip isn't about recklessness, it's about something I need for myself. I hope you can respect that." Her eyes narrowed, lips pressed tight. I can't let you go. You don't understand. It's dangerous. I don't care what you think. Michael paused, sensing that this confrontation was a pivotal moment. He could push back, argue, force her to concede. Or he could maintain calm, let her resistance meet the inevitability of his decision. He chose the latter, feeling a strange sense of power and restraint. In the quiet aftermath, he reflected on the subtle nature of revenge. True power wasn't in confrontation, it was in deliberate, controlled action that asserted his autonomy while leaving the other person to grapple with their own realization. Michael knew that when he left for the trip, Emily's reaction would be priceless, not because he had shouted or punished her, but because he had taken control of his own life. That night, he continued to refine the plan, leave quietly, observe her reaction, and speak only when necessary. He imagined every scenario, even the unexpected ones, testing his resolve against potential emotional triggers. Each imagined reaction strengthened his determination and clarified his moral compass. This was not about cruelty, it was about dignity. As sleep finally claimed him, Michael's mind was alive with anticipation, tension, and the quiet thrill of impending liberation. The trip had evolved from a simple vacation to a stage for subtle, unforgettable revenge, a statement of autonomy that would leave a lasting impression. And for the first time in days, he felt a spark of exhilaration, tinged with anxiety, knowing that the confrontation had not yet happened, but the moment of truth was approaching. In the silence of the night, one thought dominated. When Emily realized she could not control him, the look on her face would be unforgettable. And in that moment, Michael understood that true revenge didn't require cruelty. It required patience, precision, and the courage to claim your life on your own terms. The morning of departure arrived like a storm sky, gray, heavy, charged with anticipation. Michael woke earlier than usual, the sunlight filtering weakly through the blinds, painting the room in muted shades of tension. His suitcase sat packed neatly by the door, a silent testament to his impending rebellion, not against Emily, not against love, but against control itself. Every movement that morning was deliberate. Each shirt folded, each shoe polished, each item of luggage checked and rechecked. Michael felt a strange combination of nervousness and exhilaration, as though each careful action was a step closer to liberation. But beneath it all, a deeper, more potent emotion simmered, the knowledge that his carefully constructed plan, the act of subtle revenge, was about to unfold. Emily appeared soon after breakfast, her movements precise, her expression unreadable. Michael watched her from the corner of his eye, noting the slight tension in her shoulders, the tightness of her jaw. She carried herself as if the day had already been won, but he knew better. He could feel the silent battle brewing between them, a battle that required no weapons, no shouting, only wills clashing in quiet defiance. "Dad," she said suddenly, stopping in front of him, her voice a mixture of apprehension and authority. I know you've been planning this trip, but I can't let you go. I'm serious. You need to stay home." Michael turned to face her fully, his posture calm, shoulders squared, eyes steady. There was no anger in his voice, no hesitation, only a quiet, unwavering resolve. "Emily," he said, "I understand your concern, I really do. But this trip is important to me. It's something I need. And I won't cancel it, not because I'm stubborn, but because it's about living my life responsibly and fully." Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time that morning, a flicker of uncertainty passed over her features. Michael noticed it instantly, savoring the subtle shift. He had rehearsed this, yes, but the real human unpredictability added a sharp thrill he hadn't anticipated. "You don't understand." Emily's voice rose, cracking slightly at the edges. "You can't just decide everything on your own. I'm trying to protect you." Michael held up a hand, stopping her words midstream. "Emily, I know you think you're protecting me, and I appreciate that. But this isn't about danger. This is about choice. It's about respect. And respect works both ways." The words hung in the air like smoke, filling the room with tension. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting away momentarily before returning to his. There was fear there, yes, but also shock, confusion, and something else, a dawning realization that her father was no longer the man who would simply comply to keep the peace. Michael could feel his pulse quicken, the anticipation of the moment almost overwhelming. He had planned this day meticulously, rehearsed every phrase, every gesture, every reaction, but now, faced with the living, breathing Emily, he understood that the stakes were higher than he had imagined. This was no longer just about a trip, it was a demonstration of his autonomy, a statement about boundaries, respect, and self-worth. Emily's voice softened, almost pleading now. "Dad. Please. I don't want anything bad to happen. Can't you just stay for me?" Michael felt the pang of emotion, the tug of love that made this decision so painful. He loved Emily more than anything. But love, he realized, could not exist in the shadow of control. He could not let her fears dictate his life. Not today. Not ever. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Emily, listen carefully," he said, his tone calm but firm. "I am going on this trip. Not to defy you, not to hurt you, but because it's mine to take. You cannot dictate the life of another person, even if that person is your father. I hope you can understand that someday. But for now, you must simply trust me that this is the right choice for me." The room fell silent. Time seemed to stretch, elongated by the gravity of the moment. Emily's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Her hands trembled slightly as she held them at her sides. Michael could see the conflict warring inside her, the desire to control, the fear of letting go, the love for him intertwined with frustration and bewilderment. For a moment, he considered softening, offering a compromise, bending to her will to ease her pain, but he knew that doing so would undo everything he had fought to reclaim, the quiet power of standing firm, of asserting dignity without malice. His heart pounded, but he held his ground. Then, slowly, Emily's posture shifted. The rigid lines of control softened, replaced by a hesitant surrender. She looked at him, really looked at him, and in that gaze, Michael saw the realization he had been hoping for: she could not stop him. She could only witness his decision. Michael's lips curved into the faintest smile, not triumphant, not mocking, but quiet, dignified satisfaction. "I'll see you when I return," he said softly, gathering his bag. Emily remained silent, watching him, her emotions a turbulent storm behind her calm exterior. The weight of his independence, of his subtle act of revenge, had landed. She didn't speak, not because she agreed, but because she understood, finally, that control had limits and that autonomy could not be denied. As he walked toward the door, suitcase in hand, Michael felt a surge of liberation unlike anything he had experienced in years. Every step toward the car, toward the mountains, was a step toward reclaiming himself, toward asserting his dignity, toward demonstrating that respect cannot be demanded, it must be mutual. Emily's voice broke the silence, small and hesitant. "Dad. Michael glanced over his shoulder, his expression calm. "I'll see you soon," he said. No argument, no lecture, no lingering anger. Only quiet authority. The front door closed behind him, and in that sound, Michael felt the weight of the moment settle. The confrontation had ended, the statement had been made, and the consequences, both emotional and psychological, were unfolding. He drove in silence, the engine humming beneath him, the road stretching ahead like a ribbon of freedom, and as the familiar landscape of his hometown receded behind him, he realized that the true victory wasn't in Emily's reaction, it was in his own choice. The trip, the mountains, the journey, they were secondary. The real journey had been within, a reclaiming of self, a subtle, unforgettable act of personal revenge that left no scars, only understanding. In the rearview mirror, he glimpsed the small figure of Emily standing at the doorway, silent, thoughtful, shaken but seeing him clearly for the first time in years, not just as her father, but as a man with his own will, his own boundaries, and his own life. Michael smiled faintly, the taste of quiet triumph on his lips. The mountains awaited, but so did a new chapter in their relationship, one that began with respect, understanding, and the subtle, unforgettable power of standing firm. The mountains were more breathtaking than Michael had imagined. Even before he arrived, the winding roads leading into the forested valleys had already begun to strip away the weight of the weeks prior, the tension at home, the arguments, the stifling sense of control he had endured. Each mile seemed to push him farther from constraint and closer to liberation. The air was crisp, scented with pine and earth, carrying the clean, raw fragrance of freedom that his soul had craved for months. His cabin overlooked a small lake, its surface smooth like glass, reflecting the snow-dusted peaks surrounding it. Michael stepped onto the porch, taking a deep breath that seemed to push the past from his lungs, if only temporarily. He looked out over the water, imagining himself as he had always dreamed, unburdened, untethered, finally able to live for himself. Yet even in this serene moment, his thoughts inevitably drifted back to Emily. He had expected anger, resentment, perhaps even hostility upon his departure, but the look on her face as he walked out the door had been unlike anything he could have rehearsed. Shock, yes. Disbelief, yes. But more than that, a dawning recognition. She had seen, in that brief moment, that autonomy and self-respect could not be denied. And Michael knew that she would carry that realization long after the mountains faded behind him. The days passed slowly, each one filled with quiet activities, long walks in the forest, moments of meditation by the lake, hours reading on the porch as the sun dipped behind the peaks. Michael allowed himself to fully experience the solitude he had longed for. It wasn't just a vacation, it was a reclamation of self. Every decision he made on his own, from the timing of his morning coffee to the path he took along the trail, reinforced the truth he had fought to assert: he was the author of his own life. And yet, despite the peace he felt, he couldn't entirely escape reflection. The memory of Emily lingered, not as a source of anger but as a point of contemplation. He replayed their confrontation repeatedly in his mind, analyzing her expressions, her hesitation, the tremor in her voice. He considered her perspective, the fear, the instinct to protect, the intense emotional bond that made her try to control what she could not fully comprehend. And he realized something profound: true understanding required distance, patience, and perspective. Meanwhile, back at home, Emily's days were far from peaceful. The quiet house, once filled with the subtle tension of control, now echoed with her own conflicted emotions. She replayed the morning of Michael's departure repeatedly, unable to reconcile her fear for him with the reality that he had acted decisively, independently, and without malice. Her thoughts were turbulent. On one hand, she felt a pang of guilt for trying to dictate his life, for overstepping boundaries that should have been sacrosanct. On the other, she couldn't shake the underlying anxiety that something could go wrong during his absence. Emily had always believed that love meant protection, but now she was forced to recognize that love also required trust and respect. She walked through the house, touching objects that reminded her of their bond, photographs of them on vacations, shared meals, moments of laughter and quiet conversation. And yet, every memory was tinged with the realization that her attempt to control him had almost undermined that bond. She understood, with a clarity that both humbled and unsettled her, that true love sometimes demanded letting go. As Michael explored a secluded trail one afternoon, he found a small bench overlooking the valley below. He sat down, breathing in the crisp air, and reflected on the subtle nature of his act of revenge. It had not been about humiliation, punishment, or malice. It had been about assertion of self, assertion of dignity, assertion of boundaries that had been tested and nearly violated. He understood that his subtle, deliberate rebellion had consequences. It had forced Emily to confront uncomfortable truths about control, fear, and trust. It had reshaped the dynamic between them, not by confrontation or shouting, but by calm, deliberate action. And in that moment, Michael felt a quiet, unshakable sense of satisfaction, not the explosive satisfaction of vengeance, but the deeper, more enduring satisfaction of integrity upheld. Michael's thoughts drifted to the future. He knew that when he returned home, the atmosphere would be tense at first, awkward perhaps, but ultimately transformative. The balance of respect would be restored, not through punishment or resentment, but through the mutual acknowledgement of autonomy and love. He smiled softly at the thought, recognizing that sometimes the most profound lessons were delivered not by confrontation but by example, by the quiet insistence of living one's life fully and responsibly. And then, the silence was broken by the sound of his phone buzzing. A message from Emily appeared. "Dad. I'm sorry. I understand now. I was wrong to try to control you. Please forgive me." Michael stared at the screen, a wave of warmth and relief flooding through him. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat back and savored the quiet triumph of the moment. The message wasn't just an apology, it was acknowledgement, understanding, and the beginning of reconciliation. The subtle revenge had worked, not by inflicting pain, but by teaching a lesson, by asserting dignity, by creating a moment that would be remembered and reflected upon. By the end of the trip, Michael felt renewed, empowered, and profoundly connected to the lessons of the confrontation. He had reclaimed his life without causing lasting harm, demonstrated the consequences of overreach, and reminded both himself and Emily that love and respect must coexist with autonomy. As he packed his bags to return home, Michael realized that the mountains had given him more than just a vacation. They had given him clarity, perspective, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that true revenge need not destroy, it can heal, teach, and empower. The journey home was contemplative. Each mile brought him closer to Emily, not with the tension of conflict, but with the calm expectation of reconciliation. He understood that their relationship, once strained, would now move forward on a foundation reshaped by mutual respect. The subtle, unforgettable act of asserting himself had left its mark, not as a scar, but as a lasting lesson. And as the familiar rooftops of his hometown appeared on the horizon, Michael knew that the true victory wasn't in the mountains, the trip, or even Emily's reaction. It was in the reclamation of self, the demonstration of quiet power, and the restoration of a bond tempered by understanding, reflection, and love. Michael Hayes returned home a changed man. The familiar streets, the same rows of houses he had driven past countless times, now seemed somehow different. He carried with him not just the souvenirs of his trip, the worn journal filled with observations, photographs of misty mountains and tranquil lakes, but an inner clarity that had been forged in the quiet, reflective hours of his solitude. The confrontation with Emily, the subtle act of asserting himself, and the serenity of the mountains had all combined to produce something he hadn't anticipated, a profound understanding of the delicate balance between love, respect, and autonomy. Walking through the front door, Michael paused. The house smelled the same, faint traces of breakfast lingering, a hint of vanilla from a candle left burning, but the atmosphere was not as he had left it. Emily was waiting, standing near the hallway, her hands folded in front of her, eyes slightly downcast. Her expression was tentative, almost vulnerable, but the tension that had marked her every movement before his departure was gone. "Dad," she began, her voice soft, hesitant.
I was wrong."
Michael's chest tightened, but not with anger or triumph. He felt a mix of relief, warmth, and a quiet pride. He had anticipated some reaction, yes, perhaps surprise or frustration, but he hadn't expected this level of introspection from her. She continued, her words slow, deliberate, each syllable carrying weight. "I was wrong to try to control you. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I was wrong. You have your life, your choices. And I need to respect that." Michael smiled faintly, the corners of his lips curving naturally, reflecting the subtle satisfaction he had felt on the mountains. He walked toward her, stopping at a respectful distance, and spoke softly but firmly. "Emily, I know you care for me, and I know your actions came from love, not malice. But respect cannot be demanded. It must be mutual. This trip. It was never about defiance. It was about asserting that my life, my choices, and my dignity are mine to protect." Emily nodded slowly, the realization dawning fully in her eyes. There was a vulnerability there, yes, but also a dawning understanding. She had glimpsed the consequences of overreach, the delicate balance between concern and control. And in that moment, she seemed to grasp, with newfound clarity, that true love sometimes required letting go, even when it felt impossible. Michael reflected inwardly, thinking of all the subtle lessons the journey had offered. He had learned that revenge need not be violent, cruel, or humiliating. True revenge, if it could even be called that, was not about hurting others, but about reclaiming one's own dignity, asserting personal boundaries, and demonstrating, through action rather than words, that respect and autonomy could not be undermined. He recalled every step of the confrontation, every carefully chosen phrase, every deliberate pause. The power of calm, measured action had eclipsed the need for anger. He had not shouted, he had not punished, he had not sought to dominate. Yet the message had landed. Emily had seen clearly, in the quiet strength of his resolve, the consequences of her attempts to control him. And in that recognition, Michael found not only satisfaction but a profound emotional liberation. Over the next few days, father and daughter navigated the delicate terrain of reconciliation. Conversations were cautious at first, tentative bridges across the gap that had formed during the weeks of tension. Yet every interaction was infused with a new understanding, an acknowledgement of boundaries, a recognition of autonomy, and a mutual respect that had not existed before. Emily, once so insistent on control, began to understand the subtle power of trust. She realized that her attempts to dictate Michael's life had been born of love but marred by fear, and fear, when unchecked, could create barriers between even the closest hearts. Michael, on his part, had learned that asserting oneself did not necessitate cruelty, confrontation, or resentment. True power lay in calm, deliberate action, tempered with empathy and integrity. One afternoon, as they shared tea on the porch, Emily broke the comfortable silence.
"Dad, I think I understand something important now.
I thought I was protecting you by keeping you here, by controlling what you could do. But I see now that I was only limiting you, and myself." Michael nodded, pouring himself another cup. "It's hard to let go, I know. But love and respect aren't about control. They're about understanding, patience, and trust. This trip, this moment. It wasn't revenge in the cruel sense. It was a lesson, for both of us." Emily smiled faintly, a hint of tears in her eyes. "I'll try to remember that.
I want to be better.
For you, and for me." Michael felt a wave of warmth, the culmination of weeks of tension, reflection, and subtle confrontation. He realized that the real lesson of revenge, autonomy, and dignity was not about winning over someone else, but about reclaiming one's own life while allowing others to do the same. The mountains, the journey, the confrontation, they had all been necessary, but the ultimate victory was internal, the restoration of balance, respect, and understanding. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, Michael felt a profound sense of peace. The subtle act of standing firm, of asserting his independence, had not created division, it had built a foundation for a stronger, healthier relationship. The quiet, deliberate revenge had accomplished far more than he had expected. It had transformed fear into understanding, tension into respect, and control into trust. And as father and daughter sat together, sharing a simple meal in the warm glow of evening, Michael realized that the unforgettable moment he had envisioned, the look on Emily's face, was no longer just a fleeting expression of surprise or shock. It was a lasting testament to the power of dignity, self-respect, and love tempered by patience. It was the proof that revenge, when wielded with wisdom and restraint, could teach, heal, and empower, leaving no scars, only lessons carried forward into the future. The mountains had taught him, the confrontation had tested him, and Emily had learned. And in that delicate balance of understanding, Michael found the truest reward of all, not vengeance, but wisdom, connection, and the enduring strength of living life fully on one's own terms.